Hey, this is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and this is Wednesday, August 22nd. This will be our chart lesson for today, and you can see we spent the majority of the day in a very tight trading range. We had a news item right here. This was the FOMC announcement today, which is always big news, and while this price action doesn't really look any different in here, this moved really quickly to the upside and then fairly quickly back down before we started higher again. But this is a good example of how the news doesn't really change the price action. It just makes it move so much quicker, and it's so much harder to react, and it makes it a little bit scarier because, I mean, literally this move happened in a very short period of time. I mean, it took most of the trading day from 9:30 to 12:30 to get to here, but then from here to here it was about 1 o'clock to 1:05, so it took 5 minutes or so to make all that, take all that move to the upside, where it took hours to make all this move to the downside. But that's a great example of just showing you how the price action is the same. Even when there's a big news event, the price action still works the same. The difference is it just moves much faster and a lot quicker. So let's back out. You saw the big picture. I mean, this was a very obvious trading range, and if you had trouble seeing this one, then you probably have some work to do. But let me just show you. This should probably be right along here. Oops. But we opened up right in this area right in here today, and we had a little double top. We really were making a downtrend. You could have had a line down through here, like so, and you probably should have had that line there. This is just a wedge. You got a flat bottom, and I started off with mine right there because that was the lows of the day, and you probably would have you might have even had it there at the time. But you should be thinking that we're trying to test these lows of the day, and that's generally where we're headed. But we're coming right off this trend line. It's a two-legged pull back to the trend line, to the EMA. It's a little failed. See this one tick up here above these previous highs, and then prices and closed on the very low. So that's a great place to go short, thinking that we're coming down here to test these lows or these lows right here. And you can see we went a little bit lower and then reversed. So there was a long right here. This was just a failed break lower. This is a trading range. Even though this is kind of a wedge shape, this is still a trading range. Look at all the overlapping bars. Notice how we're making the lows across here. We can't really break them. So this is a great place to get long, because this is a new low for the day in a trading range. It's right after the open as well. So it was really a good place to get long. And I didn't like this long because you're right back at the trend line, possible trend line, and you got three overlapping bars, dojis with lots of stems on each side, or feathers, or whatever it is you like to call them, depending on who you learn to trade from or where you studied your trading in the beginning. You may call these things different things. I think officially, by the candles, they're called, I forget what they're called, but I've always called them stems. So if that confuses you, I'm just talking about these are your bodies where the actual coloring is, and these little lines that stick out on either side where price is traded but couldn't close, I call stems. So hopefully that brings you up to speed there if you don't know what stems are. So there was a nice entry long at the bottom of the range right here, and then we just went right back to the upper side. I didn't mark this trade because we just come off a failed trade to the lower side, and we had a lot of overlap in here. There was a setup here that you could have taken. It would have worked, but I didn't mark it. I didn't like it. And then we came up over here, and there were a couple of more opportunities to go short, but I still didn't like them because we were holding off these lows. Here were the highs before, and we were pulling back and testing those, so I wasn't sure. I had a strong suspicion we were going to try to make another leg up from here somewhere that looked like this right here. So that's why I didn't like going short there. And actually, if you'd have taken this one, you didn't really have enough room here, and you probably would have got stuck on that one. and then they ran it up. We stalled here once again at the highs. You had this little doji, so going short right there was okay. You got enough room now to come back to down to here, and you can see we went right on through that though and went all the way down here to the lows down here. I didn't mark this trade either, again, because by the time any of them triggered, we had 3 overlapping bars, and they're all dojis. So that's it's not a good place to be going long. Plus, you got to be thinking that we might come down here and test this low, and you really should have had your line down here by now. So we could have bounced from there, but you just didn't have a good setup yet. You need to wait on a second entry there. And so then we came on down and tested these lows, and then we get a little bitty doji way down here. You got plenty of room to scalp out before getting back. It's coming off the lows. You got to figure we maybe probably going all the way back to here, even though we did turn back down. But notice how we ended up making, we stalled right at the EMA. Notice there's only stems above that, and then you broke higher and you tested this previous support area, and now it's acting as resistance, and you closed on the very low. So that's worth the risk, thinking we at least come back down and test this low again and maybe make a new low. And so that was a nice short opportunity right there. Easy short. Prices did move on down. We made a new low. It was really tempting to go long right here, and you may have, and if you did, you were okay as long as you kept your stop below the signal bar, which is what we usually teach. And that was a small stop. I usually keep it at least 2 ticks. If I don't, just keep it to 2 points, and then I judge what I'm going to do based on when prices get down here. And I did get long right here because I thought this was a great trap, but you had to also be thinking we may make another leg like that. And but this is just such a great setup. I hated to pass it up. We had the trap, we had a new low, so I took it. And I almost got stopped out. You can see we came back down and tested it, but as long as you kept your stop a tick or two below that, or at your 2 points or whatever, everything was good, and there wasn't any danger of getting stopped out on that. It looked like you might, but you didn't. And we had this big bearish bar here. I really got concerned, but it was really just an overlap. By this time you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 overlapping bars, and then you got another little doji down here at the very bottom. So you got to be thinking we're going back to at least to the EMA, and of course we went all the way back and tested this high. So there was really a second chance to get long right in here, but by this time we just had so many overlapping bars, so unless you got long right here, this was not a really good setup. I wouldn't have taken it. I was already in the trade, but I wouldn't have taken this one right here. And even looking back at this one now, even though we did get a little bit of a trap, we had 1, 2, 3 overlapping bars, and 2 of them are doji. So according to our rules, that's not a real good trade. But we did have the trap, and it was a second entry type trade. So, but you were better off to wait, and then by the time you waited, there was not a very good setup, and so I didn't mark any longs right in here. Then we came back up and we tested this area again, and once again it held. We turned down and closed on a very low, so another chance to get short right there. And again, you got to be thinking we may make a second leg down like this, and that's what we were trying to do, but prices just couldn't get any lower, and you probably would have had your lower line down here like so by now. I believe that's really the spot where we were working on both sides there, maybe even a little bit higher, maybe even right there, and that's probably it from the original overnight lows. So you see we're working both sides of the price action there. The line is acting as resistance, but it's also acting as support, so that's where I would say the best spot was, right across there. But then we went into all this overlap, but we had a failed second entry short, and prices reversed, and that's a very strong bar. And that was we broke below, and then now our low's way down here for what really I would keep this bar here, but I would draw me another one down here, but we'll just move this down here for that purpose. And so with that tick lower that created a second entry short that failed in reverse, and this thing closed on its very high, that's really bullish. That's rejection right there. A lot of buying to trade down here and then move all the way back to here and close. So it was worth the risk to go long right there. Unfortunately, there were no runners on that. It pulled back, and then this is where the news hit. And again, this is just a breakout pullback long, and this was really the better entry right here. This one was semi-questionable because you're coming out of all this overlap. So if you didn't take this one for that reason, I don't blame you. I understand, but I still felt like with that trap down here on a failed second entry short that it was worth going long right there. But I'm going to say that trade's iffy. That's the way I'm going to leave that. If you didn't take it, no big deal. And if you got short right here, you definitely should have exited probably right here. But this was a great setup because this is a breakout pullback. We broke out of this range, pulled back, tested it. Again, we had a long stem and closed on our high. And there's enough room back to these highs right across here, which is where you got to figure we're probably going to go. And this moved really fast, so you didn't have time to think about this. But this thing shot straight up, and this whole move lasted about 5 minutes, where this whole move lasted about 3 hours. So that tells you how strong this move up was and how quickly it was. It wasn't really that strong. There's still a lot of selling. It just happened fast. All the buying and the selling transpired really quickly. And you get up here to your highs, you get a couple of overlapping matching highs, so you got a double top, you tick a couple ticks higher and then fail, and then you try it again and you reverse and close on your low. So going short right there was a good entry. You got enough room to come back to your EMA, back to test this breakout area right here, back to test this low. And so that was another quick and easy move. We came back up and there was another short right here, and you should have been thinking a measured move down, but I didn't like this trade because it was moving so fast, and there's a lot of overlap in here now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars, a lot of stems on both sides. It was right after the news. The market's just kind of iffy, but there is one leg down and a pullback. So if you measure the next leg down, and you should have been thinking about your trend line down here too. I wasn't sure if it was like this at this point either, so that was another reason I didn't like that short. But it turned out if you drew it through the first 2 bars, which is, you know, that you are the 2 lowest bars of the next swing, where you catch them both, you see we hit that to the tick, and that was, so that set up another, and you got that little trap right there, and of course you got these lows across here, so that set up another good long. And if you copy that and drag it to the top, you can kind of see it fit, but if you drag it all the way to the top, it fit perfect. And so we kind of had this little channel going here, and that should have been your target off of this long right here. Was you needed to be aware of this and this, but you should have been thinking we're probably going to test the upper side of that little channel there. Again, I thought it was going to be more like that right there, but and that would have still got you to the, you know, the same kind of place in here, but you know, by drawing it off the very top, you can see we caught it perfectly. And all this line is just a copy. Well, I thought it was a copy, I guess, when I moved it around, but you can see it still serves the same purpose. Again, I originally had it drawn there, but I think it was more like that right there. And so that was pretty much it for the day. By the time we got up in here, it was after 2 o'clock. We broke out of the range. You got to figure we're coming back to test it, but still it's too late. And you can see from then on, we just stayed in between the highs here, and this line up here was the overnight highs. And so you know they're always, the overnight high and the overnight low are always pretty important. You got to watch them. And so now we're stuck between that. Will we go higher or lower? I'm not sure, but if this channel holds into the next trading day, then we should be working over this direction before we go higher, or working down to this direction before we go higher. So, but that's what will happen on a really strong market. Sometimes instead of pulling back to the trend channel, they'll just get in a range and work over, and then when they finally touch, then they go higher. So That's yet to be seen. But even though it was a range day, there were a lot of good setups here. And even if you take all these out of, all these out of the middle, you still got a lot of setups here. Just buying the, you really needed to be thinking down until here, but just buying either side of the range, there's still a lot of setups today, and you can see that. But I love these kind of range days because they're so predictable, and it's really hard to start buying when you get down here to these lows, and it's really hard to sell, excuse me, from up here on these highs when prices are making new highs. But you got to learn and condition yourself to do that. And the really neat thing about these trades is that if you're entering near these lows and these highs, you can have really small stops. You might get stopped out, like right here. If you entered right here, there was still room to scalp out all the way back down to here. And we did tick higher, but then we turned down again. So, there's room, really there's no setup right here until right here. That's your first real setup. You get to go long. And look, you get to use such a small stop. But look, notice it never really took any heat. Notice here that here's your setup right here. And notice how we never took any heat after that. Here's your setup down here. This trade never took any heat. Here's your setup right here. Once this broke higher, this never took any heat. Down here, here's your setup. You really probably needed to wait to go long above these bars, but then you had that overlap. So if you didn't go long right here, you probably should have skipped this trade. But notice, this one, if you did go long right here, it did take some heat. This one took some heat regardless, but this was a little different trade. Like I said, this one was a little iffy when I talked about it earlier because we had this down sloping trend line. And we were right there at it, so there wasn't a lot of room there, so it was iffy. But you're buying a low of the day in what so far has been a trading range, and those are generally good trades, and you can see it worked out. So, but notice how most of these really good trades, they never take any heat, and and if you do, you can trade with a very small stop, and hey, so what? You lose a tick or two. It's worth the risk in most cases if the day is set up properly and you're reading it properly. So hopefully that makes sense. But I'm gonna wrap it up. I hope you had a good trading day. I'll see you tomorrow. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com.